Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Monday, December 30th around here, and we are on the eve of the CFP quarterfinals. So we're going to break down that first game. We're going to break down Penn State, Boise State today. We'll probably do the next three tomorrow, so definitely be on the lookout for that. But wanted to make sure I got that one out of the way, gave you guys plenty of time to look over that one before that game eventually happens. Then we'll get to a couple of bowl game reactions from this past weekend. We had 6 games that really stood out to me, and then we'll go into segment 3 and we'll just kind of finish up the rest of them. We'll talk about all the games that have already happened, and then we got a number of ones coming up this week. Want to make sure I get those on y'all's radar before we fully dive into the CFP quarterfinals. We have some transfer portal news. It is officially closed, at least the calendar has closed. We'll talk about some of the details of when it's actually going to close here pretty soon, but definitely a lot of big names that have come off the market. A&M doing some great work at the wide receiver position. And then we'll get to some quarterfinal questions. We'll get to some just basic questions about, is rest versus rust. That's the big thing that's going into this weekend that we don't really know the answer to yet. We'll try to figure it out on today's show. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show. And the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat. At the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page, you can click that $sign, add any question, comment you like. It'll pop up on the screen with your name, and we can have a fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be as interactive as possible, so definitely utilize that, especially if you have any questions about this one. Huge game out there in Phoenix tomorrow actually. Penn State, Boise State, going to be a really incredible matchup. We are officially at the CFP quarterfinals. It is going to be a really, really interesting time. A lot of people hoping for some better games this time around, and I tend to believe we're going to get some really good ones. Will this be one of them? I think is a little bit more up in the air, but let's jump into this thing. Penn State is favored by 11.5 in this game, 53.5 the over-under, pretty much middle of the road, maybe a couple more points in this one than some people expect, but overall, I think before we get into details, just broad strokes purposes, they need number 2. Boise State absolutely needs number 2 to be the biggest player in this game. They need Ashton Jeanty to take over this game because the reality of this matter is they can lose this game if Ashton Jeanty goes for 170 yards and 2 scores. They can't win it if he goes for 30 yards and no scores. That's just the reality of this offense. That's the reality of the gap between these two teams. He is the guy that can bridge that gap. So if you're losing the line of scrimmage battle on the defensive side of the ball, if you're giving up a couple of explosives on that side of the ball, if you're struggling offensively at different times, he's going to be able to be that kind of trump card that you can throw down and say, maybe we'll just get a 60-yard run here, and he's very capable of doing it. He did it against Oregon earlier in the year, definitely different circumstances, and it'll be interesting to see how much carries over from this game, from that game all the way back in week 2 to this game this time around, because teams have changed. Let's just be totally honest. Penn State is a much better team than probably Oregon was in week 2, and Oregon is definitely a much better team than they were in week 2. So overall, I think it's kind of a tightrope walk. You have to figure out, how much is Ashton Jeanty going to play a huge piece in this game, and how much can he take on his shoulders? How much can he actually bear in this game? Because the reality is, he is the guy that kind of gives them a shot here. There are a number of really good players on that Boise State team, and there's a number of guys that can have impacts on this game and need to have impacts on this game in a number of different respects. None of it matters if Ashton Jeanty does not have a big game. Let's just be totally honest. They could do just about everything right. If they don't have number 2 playing at a very high level, it's going to take a really, really Herculean effort from someone else to possibly pull this off. So that's the first thing. Just broad strokes purposes, they need this guy to be what he's been all year and maybe a little bit more than that. But on top of that, you need a counterpunch. There's no world where you're going to be able to just run him 35 times in a row. He's going to go for 275 yards, 3 scores, and you're going to walk out with a 21-20 win. You badly need something else. You badly need a counterpunch, and it's not going to be the easiest defense to give a counterpunch against because their back end is pretty darn good. Now, I do think there are openings to be had, but not much openings to be had if they're able to stop Jeanty early. They're not going to be worried about that pass game very much. But Cameron Camper, Latrell Caples, Matt Lauder, all those guys are hugely important for this game. Not just, they don't need to make all the plays in the world. I don't need Cameron Camper to go out there for 12 catches, 150 yards, and 2 scores. That is not what he's going to do in this game. What he does need to do is maybe catch that 3rd and 8 when they get back behind the chains and Ashton Jeanty starts to struggle. Or when when they need a jump ball in the end zone, Matt Lauder needs to go up and make that play. Latrell Caples on an end around needs to be able to take a little bit of pressure off Ashton Jeanty in the run game. So it's really all about, it's number 2 at the very center, and then the peripheral the players on the outside, the players on the defensive and offensive side of the ball just need to fill in the gaps. And defensively, the gaps are very, very simple. It's very simple how they're going to be able to explode this game is the pass rush. They're second in the country in sacks this year with 51 on the year. If they can get after Drew Aller, there are still mistakes to be had. He's still a young quarterback. He is still new to all of these trappings and all of these craziness around these big-time games. You get to him early, you force a mistake early, some things could happen pretty quickly. So those are the two things. You have Ashton Jeanty. You have one of the best players in the country, maybe the best player in the country, depending on who you're talking to. He is going to have to carry the load, whether that's 150 yards rushing, 200 yards rushing, whatever that looks like. He's going to have a big game, because if he doesn't have a big game, they're not winning this game. Just plain and simple, and it probably will look a little bit ugly on the way there. But on the flip side of that, if they can get Ashton Jeanty running the ball, if they can control the clock the way that they have been against a number of other teams and get a couple of those explosive runs that he's so good at breaking, and then that defensive line can show up the way they have pretty much this entire year and really kind of explode this thing, that's the path to an upset. That's the path to possibly getting 1 turnover, getting 2 turnovers from Drew Aller, getting a short field, getting Ashton Jeanty into the end zone, and then you look up and you're up 7 points with about 4 minutes left, and Penn State is the one that's kind of struggling at the end. So that's kind of your path forward. Now, how realistic is it that you're going to find the openings that you need to is a bigger question for this one, because that Penn State defense is terrifying. Let's just be totally honest. They're number 7th in the country when it comes to rush yards per game, and Ashton Jeanty obviously changes some things. There are a lot of very good run defenses that weren't so good when they played number 2, but at the end of the day, this is going to be one of the stiffest challenges he has faced all year, definitely since Oregon, and it's going to be really interesting to watch how they're going to be able to figure that out. Now, the counterpunch category, having to find a couple of those openings on the back end and having to get Cameron Camper the ball and find a couple of big plays down the field. Penn State, I believe their back end can be attacked. I do believe that there are openings on that back end to go after. Oregon showed that. A couple of different teams have showed that throughout the year. The issue with that is, if you can't get the run going, none of that's going to matter. They are plenty good enough on the back end to handle you if they don't have to, commit more guys to the box. If they don't have to make sure they have 8, 9 guys in the box just to stop number 2. There are going to be openings on the back end. If they don't have to do that, if they feel confident sitting 6-5 guys in the box and just handling the run that way, it's going to be pretty tough. So it all comes with being able to set up Ashton Jeanty, and then there should be some openings on this back end, although it's a very, very strong group up there. And then you look at the pass rush element of this, getting after Drew Aller. How does that kind of affect the game plan, and can they do it? The Penn State O-line has given up 8 sacks all year. They've been very, very good in that category pretty much all year. Boise State has 4 guys that can really, really make a lot of problems for them, and definitely is a guy that can they're definitely a group that can make a lot of noise in this game. The issue is you're going up against a very good group, and you're going up against an offense that, in a lot of cases, Drew Aller is going to get the ball out of his hands pretty quickly. He's going to facilitate the ball to the playmakers and then let things kind of fall into place. So overall, it's a thin path. Let's just be totally honest. I don't think anyone is thinking any differently about this game. It is a thin path for Boise State to find their way to a victory here. That being said, you do have the best player on the field. Ashton Jeanty will be the best player on the field tomorrow. And then defensively, you probably have the better, I don't want to say that. You probably have a very good pass rush that absolutely can get after Drew Aller well enough to at least force a couple of mistakes. And that's what Boise State needs. They need Ashton Jeanty to run the ball the way he pretty much has all year, get over 150, possibly get in the end zone a couple of times, and then their defense just has to make a couple of plays, whether that's a sack on 3rd down or a pick or a forced pick or a forced fumble on Drew Aller, whatever that looks like. They have to make a couple of those plays because without those 50-50 plays, without Ashton Jeanty having an incredible game, and without them at least keeping their cool just a little bit throughout these really tough moments throughout this game, this one could get ugly, and it could get ugly in a hurry. So it's a thin path. There's no doubt about that, but you have the openings to do it, and it's because of this guy. And that's the first player to watch. Let's be honest. I could get crazy here. I could, call out a wide receiver that needs to have a big game and everything in between. This is the guy. You need him to have the game that he's been having pretty much all year. You need to make sure that he is the absolute center of your offense. Now, Penn State knows that as well. There's no two ways about that. But the reality is, so many teams try to mess up or mix up what they're trying to do in these types of games because they know they're outmatched on the other side. Just play your game. Play with your guy, trust your guy, and let him go to work in this one, and you'll probably like the results, if I'm being totally honest. And then you got Jaden Virgin-Morgan on the outside for Boise State. We talked about that pass rush, 51 sacks on the year. This is their leading sack guy, and he's got to get after him. There are some really solid offensive tackles for Penn State, one relatively young one in Anthony Donko, and I think there is some openings to possibly get after him if you can early. I think when you get after this Penn State offense early and when you kind of put them behind the chains early, I think there starts to be a little bit of a panic. We've seen it at different points throughout this year where it's taken them a little bit of time to kind of regroup after a mistake or regroup after just kind of missing the mark just a little bit. If Jaden Virgin-Morgan and Ahmad Hassanin can really get after this quarterback, some really incredible things should happen early in this game that gives Boise State a 14-0 advantage before we even know what hit us. And then Harrison Wallace, very important player for Penn State's future. If they want to win a national title, number 6 is going to be massive. And all those wide receivers are really going to be massive, but this is the guy that I think we all trust the most. You have Tyler Warren. He takes a lot of pressure off you, but the reality is, if you can't push the ball downfield, at some point someone's going to be able to pin you in. Maybe it's not in this game. Maybe it's Boise State isn't quite capable of stopping the run the way some other teams will. But the reality is, at some point, you're going to need those big plays over the middle of the field. He's going to have to be the guy to go make them. One way or the other, he is going to be a huge player in this Penn State journey. And then Zane Durant. When you're playing a guy like Ashton Jeanty, if you have a guy at nose tackle or at defensive tackle like Zane Durant, he's the most important player. He's going to have to plug the middle. That Boise State offensive line is going to have their hands full. They did really well against Oregon early on in the year. I think this is probably going to be a little bit tougher of a test. This is a very, very good, very deep group, and Zane Durant's definitely going to lead the way. If they can slow him down at the line of scrimmage, obviously Ashton Jeanty can make plays after contact, but I don't think it's a great, it's not a recipe for success for Boise State. Let's just put it that way. But some keys to the game for Boise State, just unleash the pass rush. I understand that some bad things could happen on the back end. You could have openings on the back end. You probably will if you don't get home right away. You're not winning this game without sacks. You're not winning this game without getting to Drew Aller, without moving him off his spot, without making him nervous. So the reality is, you're going to have to make some decisions. You're going to have to rush 6 and then leave 5 on the back end to cover 5 guys and hope that they can cover all of them. You're going to have to rush 7 at different times and be outmatched on the other side and just hope you can get home. It's going to be a lot of roulette. It's going to be a lot of just kind of rolling the dice, hoping that you come up right. But the reality is, when you have 51 sacks on the year, you come up right a lot. So we'll see what happens in that one. That's definitely something that I understand the back end's going to need some help at times with Tyler Warren and all these receivers. If you don't get to Drew Aller, you don't win this game, plain and simple. And then trust your guy. There's a million different examples I can go through of teams that are playing higher rated, more talented, more physically imposing teams, and they say, oh, we got to catch them off guard. We got to do something different. We got to zig while they think we're going to zag. Just trust number 2. He's one of the best players in the country. He's the best running back in the country. He's the most dangerous player on the field whenever he steps on it. Hand him the ball and get out of the way. Well, offensive linemen stay in the way, but everyone else, the reality is this is the game plan. Number 2 has gotten you here. Let him take you to a win. He is really the only chance you have to take you to a win here. And then make Penn State sustain drive. This is going to be a huge thing. If Penn State starts hitting explosive early in this game, which Drew Aller is plenty capable of doing, you're going to have a big-time problem. There's no doubt about that. You're going to have to be able to slow down those explosive plays and then really just make them inch down the field. They're capable of doing it. I'm not saying that Penn State can't win the game that way, but it will limit possessions. It will limit the margin that Penn State is able to get, and then it will give you a shot when the fourth quarter rolls around, and that's really all you can ask for if you're Boise State. And then for Penn State, just attack mode early, get after these guys, because the reality is Boise State knows everything that I just said. They understand that they are physically outmatched in this one. They understand that if they're going to have a big-time game, it's going to be Ashton Jeanty leading the way. They get all of that. So the reality is attack. Go after them from the jump, and then at the end of the day, they might look up and say, down 21-0 halfway through the first quarter, and we don't know what we're doing now. Because if they do get down 14-0, 21-0 early on in this game, then it's not on Ashton Jeanty's shoulders. Then it's on Maddox Madsen's shoulders, and you'd much rather it be there. And that's actually the next key. Make him beat you. If you're going to lose this game, it is not going to be because Ashton Jeanty ran for 250 yards and 3 scores. That cannot be the reason. So make sure you stack the box. If it has to be 8, 9 guys, whatever you have to do to slow down number 2, you do that. And then you live with what happens on the back end. You have Jalen Kimber, you have A.J. Harris. They should be able to hold up against these wide receivers for Boise State, force them into passing downs, and you'll probably love the way that this game ends. And then play mistake-free. When you play one of these games where the line is so big, the physical ability is so big between the two teams, if Penn State plays mistake-free football, if they don't turn the football over, if they don't have bad penalties, if they don't have to settle for 3 points when they could have gotten 7, they're going to be more than fine. They're going to win this game. You have to make Boise State earn absolutely everything they get in this game, and if you give them a couple of short fields, that's when this game can get really interesting. So, two teams that have had really, really incredible years. Boise State has been one of the stories of the year, particularly Ashton Jeanty, and I think he's going to be able to maybe get close to that record. I believe it's 133 is what he needs to pass Barry Sanders for that all-time rushing record, but at the end of the day, Penn State's just got too much for this one. I think that Penn State offense is going to be able to make a number of plays down the middle of the field. I think that pass rush for Boise State might take a little bit longer to get home than they're going to need to, and I think Drew Aller in a dome is going to be able to make a number of big-time plays in this one. I do like Ashton Jeanty to get probably over 100 yards, get a couple of scores in there, but at the end of the day, I think Penn State probably runs away with this one, starts the CFP quarterfinals on not necessarily the note that we want, but I think we got 3 great ones on the next day, and we will break those down tomorrow, but definitely going to be an incredible game out there in Phoenix. I'm going to pick Penn State to win it relatively comfortably, and move forward to play the winner of that Notre Dame-Georgia game for a spot in the national title. Absolutely crazy to talk about that with James Franklin, but here we are. He's 1 win away from possibly making his way to the national title. But let's take our first break here. Went a little bit long on that one, but let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we got bowl game reactions. We got a couple of huge ones that I want to talk about, and then in the third segment, we'll go a little bit more into depth with a couple of them, but we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits some losing shit. A stupid myth, you choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about that Penn State-Boise State game. Got a little bit long there, but going to be an incredible game out there in Phoenix. I am going to pick Penn State to win relatively comfortably in that one, but the reality is when Ashton Jeanty is on the field, a lot of special things can happen. So we'll see what happens there. Definitely could be an upset over there in Phoenix, but let's get to a little bit of a bowl game roundup. This bowl season has been incredible. I don't know if anyone else is catching on, but this is one of the best bowl seasons that I can remember, and it's definitely making me feel like we might be reviving bowl season just a little bit over the next couple of years. I absolutely love that. It's so much fun to watch these bowls unfold, even if you do have a couple of things that people aren't too happy about, and that's what we'll start with, actually. Cam Ward had a little bit of controversy in this game. I do want to start with Iowa State, though. Iowa State did an incredible job finding their way back into this game. Rocco Beck leads a really incredible touchdown drive to finish this thing off. No Jaden Higgins in this game, so it was a lot of Jalen Noel. Went over 100 yards in this game, was really, really incredible. And Rocco Becht won the MVP, got his nice little trophy, and got a little Pop-Tart at the very end. Very, very nice for him. But overall, really, really incredible game, incredible atmosphere, and I really just hats off to Pop-Tarts for really kind of buying into what this should be. It should be fun, it should be kind of weird, it should be goofy, and then we should have some fun playing football. That's the reality of bowl season at this point. Obviously, the opt-outs and stuff is not ideal. I'm not going to, necessarily say that's the way I want this to go. But the reality is these type of companies kind of really putting their energy into this, really putting full force behind it, has really created a great atmosphere around them. So I hope more companies like Pop-Tart kind of follow that way of thinking going forward, because this was a very fun spectacle, both from the football perspective and everything happening off the field was plenty fun and really goofy all at the same time. But for Miami, the big topic of conversation is Cam Ward. He played the first half, threw for 3 touchdowns, was playing incredible football, and then sat in the second half. And people had a lot of questions. They said he quit on his teammates. They said this, that, and the other. What do you always say when someone opt out? And it's usually guys that don't have their face on Twitter. But at the end of the day, I don't blame him for making this decision. Frankly, I think it was as much Mario Cristobal's decision as it was Cam Ward's decision, because the reality is they got a quarterback problem there. Emory Williams came into this game, and let's just say they're going to need a portal guy. They're going to need to go get a quarterback. Their quarterback of 2025 is not on the roster right now. They finally got to figure that out against Iowa State this weekend. So that's one part of this. I really don't think this was an entirely Cam Ward decision. I think he was in on the decision. I'm not saying they just entirely boxed him out, but I do think this was a kind of joint decision, and I think it makes a lot of sense for Miami in the future. I think if you're a Miami fan, and maybe Miami fans can tell me I'm wrong here, but if you're a Miami fan, I can't imagine you were too upset about the way that went down. You know what Cam Ward is. He got the record that you were very much hoping he would get, although Dylan Gabriel's breathing down his neck right now. But overall, you got what you needed out of him, and then you get to move forward and you get to see what you have from the young kid. It's not ideal. I would have loved to see Cam Ward out there. I would love to see every single player out there in every single bowl game throughout the year. That's just not the reality. And also, he didn't hurt his draft stock at all. People need to understand that did not impact his draft stock even a little bit. If anything, it probably helped him a little bit with how well he played and how poorly Shedeur played later in the day. So overall, it's a big load of nothing as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I understand the frustration. I would love for him to have been out there. I kind of wanted him to come off the bench and lead that last drive, but overall, he did plenty at Miami. He gave them a ton of success this past year, and I think it's one of those things where people are going to make a big deal out of it. I really don't see it as that big of a deal. I think I got to see Emory Williams, see what he was capable of. Turns out they're probably going to have to go get a transfer portal quarterback. I think it works out for everyone involved. I get the frustration, but overall, just kind of the way of the world right about now. But going back and forth into this game, it was incredible. It was all over the place. It was especially early in this game. In the first half, it looked like we were about to have a 100-100 type game. But at the end of the day, when you look at Miami, when you go forward, the defense needs to be fixed. There will be staff changes. I can almost promise you that. I can't promise how radical they will be or how many people will be out the door, but changes are coming on that side of the ball. There's no doubt. Much like LSU last year, and we've had quite a few comparisons between this year's Miami and last year's LSU. It's coming to a T, especially in the offseason stuff. But an incredible year ahead, I'm sure, in 2025, but quite a bit of work to do, and it starts with that quarterback position. For Iowa State, great finish to an incredible year. Obviously, that Big 12 championship was very, very tough, but ability to bounce back is absolutely huge. Rocco Becht comes back next year, and that kid can go. I'm so excited to see what he can do next year in 2025. The wide receivers will be a little bit of a question with Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins walking out the door, but I love Eli Green. I love Isaiah Alston. I think they have plenty of guys in that room. And then overall, Miami needs a quarterback. I think that's what we learned from this one. I understand being upset at Cam Ward, but at the end of the day, I think the kid made a decision that a lot of us would have made in his position, so not mad at him at all. I think it worked out for just about every party. And then this one, did not expect it. I'll be totally honest with you. I thought Colorado was going to be ready to roll. I thought they were going to make a couple more plays in this one, and it was not the ending Shedeur Sanders or Travis Hunter wanted to their career. It's been incredible careers, one with a Heisman, one that frankly probably should have been in New York for that Heisman ceremony, but remarkable careers. really tough days. 2 INTs from Shedeur Sanders. They had 2 rushing yards all day, which is something they're definitely going to have to address in the offseason, but truly dominating from that BYU defense from start to finish. Really, really incredible. And then on the offensive side of the ball, didn't look all that good, I'll be totally honest. BYU threw three INTs in this game. They lost the turnover battle, which is not something they're used to doing, but they also got 4.3 yards per carry. They got a punt return for a touchdown and just kind of handled business elsewhere. Kalani Sitake did an incredible job coaching in this game, just a really, really coaching masterpiece throughout this one. But overall, a tough ending for Colorado, no doubt about that. You'd love to see Shedeur and Travis kind of ride off into the sunset with a win, but 2 remarkable careers. There's no doubt about that. They went to the HBCU level when a lot of people were recruiting him to go to higher levels. They really kind of changed the way that we look at HBCUs in a number of different ways going forward, and then took over Colorado and made it a program that people talk about, which is something that you could not say 2 years ago. Remarkable 2 players, and I have to assume we'll be hearing their names called very, very early in April when we get to the NFL draft. For BYU, remarkable. It's been incredible to watch what this team has done this year. I've been one guy that has been a little bit hesitant around BYU because some of the turnover margin, because some of the kick returns and stuff that are a little bit fluky in some respects. It made me nervous about this team down the stretch. They did make a couple of mistakes, but frankly, 11-2 season and probably should have been a little bit more in that CFP conversation than they were. At the end of the day, remarkable year for the Cougars, and you got Jake Retzlaff for another year. So let's have some fun. Let's see what they can do in 2025. Could very well be right back in that Big 12 conversation in 2025. USC A&M was an absolutely crazy one. USC started their year in Las Vegas against an SEC team, winning with 8 seconds left with a go-ahead touchdown. They finished their season against an SEC team in Las Vegas, winning with 8 seconds left with a game-winning touchdown. Ridiculous. I don't know how they pulled that off, but at the end of the day, they were down 17 with 4 minutes left in the third quarter. USC scores touchdowns on all but one drive, which was an INT by Jaden Maiava. A lot of INTs in this game. They also got a 2 3-and-outs and a missed field goal from A&M. This game was covered in mistakes. We had 5 INTs, I believe 3 from Jaden Maiava, 2 from Marcel Reed, if I'm not mistaken. Both had a missed field goal, 70 penalty yards for both teams. It was not pretty football. Let's just put it that way. It was not pretty football. USC was able to find the final play, and quick shout out to Jacoby Lane and Kyle Ford. Lane, player of the game, 7 catches, 127 yards, 3 scores in this one. A lot of guys walked out the door at USC, especially at that wide receiver position. He has stuck it out, and he had an incredible game in this one. I like to think he will be in LA next year, and it'll be really fun to see what he can do in one more year in that offense. And then Kyle Ford, he's had a injury-riddled career. He's had 2 knee injuries. He's had to transfer. He transferred to UCLA, back to USC. Has had a very, very weird college career. But his final play in college was a touchdown to win his team that game. Has to be a really cool moment for him, for his family. So quick shout out to him. It's been a long road to get here, but definitely the finish that he very much deserves. And USC gets a little bit of consolation prize. Plenty of work to do in this offseason. It's kind of insane how much work they have to do, but at the end of the day, they'll be a fascinating team to watch. They could very well get 9 wins next year. They could very well bottom out, and Lincoln Riley's looking for a job. So a lot of things could happen around LA, and we'll try to keep you updated as best we can throughout this offseason. And then A&M, you start 7-1, you're leading the SEC, you're 1 win away from the SEC title. You finish 8-5, and now you're looking around. You have upgraded in the portal. You've done a great job there. I have questions around Marcel Reed going into next year. It'll be very, very interesting to see what happens in that respect. But overall, I think it's one of those games where just A&M season. It feels like everything went wrong for them down the stretch of this game, like it did in the back stretch of this season. And then we had this one. This one was a little bit more aggressive than the scoreline shows here. Vanderbilt pretty much controlled this game from the jump in. It was Diego Pavia. He was absolutely incredible in this one. Had nearly 250 total yards, 5 touchdowns, was the Vandy Bull record. Remarkable player, one of those guys that we know has been incredible all year, but had to show off just one more time in 2024. He will be back for 2025 to show off plenty of more times. But Georgia Tech is starting to mount a comeback started to mount a comeback after the lightning delay, but got 2 late touchdowns within 8 minutes left, and got within 8. missed an onside kick with about 1:30 left, and that was about all she wrote. So wasn't necessarily all that nail-biter of a game, but Georgia Tech made it interesting late in that game. They're one of those teams that is not going to stop fighting until they see triple zeros on that clock. But great year from both these teams. Really remarkable to see what both these coaches, what both these staffs, what both these quarterbacks have been able to do throughout this year. So the momentum could really not be higher around both these places. Going into next year, you have your quarterback back. They're both 7-6 this year. They could very easily be 9-win teams and be firmly in the CFP conversation next year. Definitely going to need to do some work in the offseason, fill in some gaps, particularly Vanderbilt on that defensive side of the ball, but definitely two teams that I think would be really, really fun to watch in the ACC and the SEC respectively. And then this one. I don't know. I don't know what to make of Oklahoma right now. I'll be totally honest with you. The first two drives, Oklahoma rolled down the field. They were up 14-0. They were dominating. After those two drives, the rest of the game, they had 2 turnovers on downs. They had 3 punts. They had an end-of-half drive. They had a fumble. They had a missed field goal before the final drive that gave them a chance to win the game. This offense is just inept. And obviously, they're getting Ben Arbuckle in there. Obviously, they're getting John Mateer in there at quarterback. They're not fixing all the problems with this offense. And we can get to that throughout the offseason. We can break down Oklahoma and get into that in more detail. But they got some soul searching to do. There are a lot of great things to think about in 2025, but you just lost Zach Alley, so you now have to replace your quarterback, both coordinators, for the second year in a row. That is an incredibly tough thing to do, and the reality is you're in the SEC where everyone feels like they're scaling. LSU feels like they're scaling. Texas is scaling. Georgia is going to be Georgia. Bama is going to find their footing next year. You are in a really, really tough spot if you're Oklahoma. If you do not hit on just about everything you do in the portal from here forward, you're in a really tough spot in 2025. They'll be a fascinating team to watch because I think the talent is there. I think Brent Venables is a plenty good head coach to turn that corner, but they got some problems personnel-wise, and they have to figure that out very, very quickly, or it's going to get very ugly around there in Norman for quite some time. But to Navy, to the winners of this game, because it was really incredible to watch this team this year. Blake Horvath was absolutely incredible. He is only a junior, so he will be back for next year. 10 wins, Commanders-in-Chief trophy, bowl win over Oklahoma. It doesn't get much better than that if you're a Navy team. So remarkable stuff from them. Really, really enjoyed them this year and cannot wait to see what Blake Horvath can do his senior year. What's going on, Anthony? Nice to see you. And then wanted to give some love to Nebraska here. They are over 500 for the very first time since 2016. It's been a long road, and it's been a very, very tough one. A really gutsy performance from Ramir Johnson in his hometown. Really incredible moment for him. But overall, this was a building block. It was not the year that Nebraska wanted by any means, but you have Dylan Raiola coming back, Dane Key coming in from the portal. The supporting cast should get better and better. I think the defense will be more than fine next year, even with a lot of guys walking out the door. 2025 is it for Matt Rule. If he does not deliver, if they don't get to, I'll say 9 wins. I can't necessarily promise that's what Nebraska fans think, but overall, I do think 9 wins would probably do the trick. For Boston College, it's a good start to the Bill O'Brien era. Obviously, there are going to be talent gaps. That's just the reality of being the head coach at Boston College. I think he did a really good job throughout this year with this team, and I think he'll be a very good head coach going forward for Boston College. But overall, those are the big ones that stood out to me. Those are the games that really, really kind of jumped off the page to me, especially that game against Iowa State Miami. Not so much for what happened on the field, although that was incredible, but everything that happened on Twitter afterwards, trying to tear Cam Ward down. I'm not necessarily a part of that group. I understand the frustration. I would have loved to see Cam Ward out there, very much so. But at the end of the day, it's the way the world works now. So I'm not necessarily going to fight it too much. It'll be interesting to watch what he does the rest of the way. But let's take our second break here, and when we come back, we will talk about all of the other bowl games. We'll talk about the ones that have already happened, some of the under-the-radar ones, and then we'll get you prepared for all the ones coming up this week. So stick with us, and we'll be right back with that.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the bigger bowl games from this past weekend. Wanted to break them down really quickly, including that Cam Ward controversy, but wanted to get to this Sam Leavitt thing that Anthony was talking about here. There's a world where that happens. I'd be a little bit surprised. I think him and Kenny Dillingham are like two peas in the pod. I think it just fits absolutely perfectly, but let's be honest. The transfer portal does not give us many answers, so it is very possible that that is something that could happen. There's a million things that go around right now. Some of them happen, some of them don't. I'll wait until after the game to get a better read on that. I'm sure some people have heard some things, but we'll know much more after that clock hits 0. I would assume he is staying in Arizona State. If he doesn't, and he does possibly look at Miami as an option, he can fit in that offense. There's no doubt about that. He's not going to give you, those crazy throws that Cam Ward gave you, but he is going to give you a little bit more quarterback run game. He will have to kind of adapt a little bit, Shane Dawson will, to what he does well, but overall, very, very talented kid, can fit into a lot of different systems, can make a ton of different athletic plays, so I think he could fit over there at Miami. I'd be a little bit surprised if he were to walk out of Arizona State right now just because it feels like the perfect fit for him, but at the end of the day, the transfer portal is wild. I'm not going to be saying anything definitively over the next little bit, so we'll see what happens there. If Miami does pick him up, I think it's a very talented guy that not only could be great in 2025, but in 2026 could really explode and become a fantastic player for them. So wouldn't be the worst fit in the world. We'll wait until that game finishes to see what happens there. But let's get to all the other bowl games, because there were a number of really, really good ones this past weekend, and there are some great ones leading up to these CFP games this week. So let's go ahead and jump into this, and let's talk about all the games that already happened. And I want to start with Kyle McCord. Huge shout out to Kyle McCord. Became the all-time ACC passing leader in a season. Remarkable season for that kid, and really for Syracuse overall. They get to 10 wins in the very first year of Fran Brown. I could not like that guy more. He is so much fun to watch. He's the right energy you need as a head coach, especially at a place like Syracuse. I think he's going to be there as long as he wants to be there. I'll put it that way. There will be plenty of places that will be calling him, especially next offseason, to see what he wants to do. If that Auburn job opens up, just watch out for him. Let's just put it that way for the time being. But overall, remarkable game from Syracuse, remarkable season, and really Kyle McCord just got all the haters off his back throughout this year. And then Arkansas gets a big-time win over Texas Tech. This was one that I really didn't expect. I thought Arkansas was going to struggle in this game with a lot of the guys transferring out. They played really good football. It was really, really awesome to watch these two. And I think when you look towards the offseason, two very much wild cards. I don't know what they're going to look like in 2025. Arkansas has lost a number of guys. Texas Tech has brought in a number of guys. It's going to be a toss-up. Both those teams are teams that I think could be dangerous, particularly Texas Tech in the Big 12, but overall going to be really interesting to watch what those teams do this offseason. Then you got UConn dominating North Carolina really throughout this day, and Bill Belichick has to have some questions. There's no doubt about that. But overall, I do think it's one of those things where take it for what it is. This is not going to be the team that lines up in August for UNC. There's almost no doubt about that. So overall, I think it's going to be really interesting to watch that unfold. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a very different team. I wouldn't take that and just immediately say, oh, next year is going to stink for North Carolina. There's going to be a lot of players that are going to be walking out and in those doors over the next little bit. TCU gets a very comfortable win in this one. They dominated this game from the jump, and Josh Hoover led the way. Sonny Dykes feels like he has his quarterback, and I think we all know what it looks like when Sonny Dykes has his quarterback. We saw it with Max Duggan. We could see it again in 2025 with Josh Hoover. Really like that kid, and I think you put a couple more pieces behind him, shore up that defense just a little bit. This thing could get really interesting again down there in Fort Worth. And then Miami of Ohio just rolls over Colorado State. I thought this was going to be a defensive battle. It was not at all. And they had to put on for Snoop Dogg. I totally understand that. He was absolutely incredible on the call for this one. But overall, great year for Miami of Ohio. Great year for Colorado State. Both these teams will be contenders in 2025. And Colorado State will be looking forward to the Pac-12 in 2026. So a lot of different things happening for those two schools. Hopefully Miami of Ohio and the MAC is staying safe for the time being, but Colorado State will be undergoing quite a bit of change over the next little bit. And then East Carolina wins that battle for North Carolina over NC State. It was one that NC State really did come back in, and then 86-yard touchdown run from Harris really kind of put this one away from Eastern Carolina. But tough scene at the end with that brawl. Hope everyone is okay there. Obviously something you never want to see, and something that we tend to see a couple of times throughout the college football year. Hopefully no one was injured. Saw the ref that had, the bloody nose and the bloody face. Hope he is more than fine at this point. I believe he is. I've seen different reports there, but overall, going into the offseason, I don't know what to make of NC State going forward. I think they're going to have to do a ton of work in the portal. I really like CJ Bailey, so maybe the quarterback position is handled. Otherwise, you got a lot of work to do, especially with Kevin Concepcion walking out the door. There's a lot of things that need to happen around there if they want to be successful going forward. But games coming up this week. We do have the battle for the yellow. We have Iowa against Missouri, going to be an incredible matchup here, and two teams that are going to be really interesting going into next year. Two teams that are going to look very, very different. Iowa's losing just about everyone on the back end of that defense. Missouri's losing just about every skill player that they have on that offense. So a lot of different things that will be changing for this team. Not a ton of opt-outs, but definitely a fair share here. Luther Burden will not go in this game. Brady Cook will go in this game for his final one at Missouri. No Caleb Johnson for Iowa or Jamari Harris. You will have Sebastian Castro. You will have a couple of the other guys on this team that are very talented that want to play their final game for their team. So you'll have plenty of talent on the field, no doubt about that. No Mookie Cooper as well from Missouri, so a lot of Theo Weiss, a lot of these younger guys kind of stepping up, which is always kind of cool to see. As you look forward to 2025, want to see a couple of those young players step up. But I think it's going to be a fun one. I think they're going to get after each other a little bit. I really like what Brendan Sullivan has brought to that Iowa offense. But without Caleb Johnson, I really can't trust Iowa to put many points on the board. I'm going to roll with the Tigers here. I'll roll with them to cover in this game, and I think Brady Cook leaves Columbia as a winner. Alabama-Michigan, the rematch from the Rose Bowl a year ago. This time it's in Orlando for the ReliaQuest Bowl. So a little bit of a step down, let's just put it that way. And you will see a couple of opt-outs here, particularly on the Michigan side of the ball. It sounds like Jalen Milroe will go in this one, but I think they're kind of playing a little tongue-in-cheek, so we'll see what happens there. Maybe he plays for a half and then finds his way to the sideline to let Ty Simpson do his thing. But for Michigan, no Edwards, no Mullings, a ton of defenders that will not be playing in this game. And on the quarterback side, I don't think I'm alone thinking I would love to see Bryce Underwood start this game. I know you can't do that, but at the end of the day, I'd love to see number 19 trot out there with the number 1 offense, but it will be Davis Warren out there, and he has played relatively good football towards the back end of the season. Had a tough day against Ohio State, but that's just the reality of playing that Ohio State defense, so it'll be interesting to see what he can do. That Bama defense will be flying at him. I can almost promise you that. Michigan's missing a ton of guys on either side of the ball. Not a soul is going to be able to guard Ryan Williams except for the guy that's not going to be playing in Will Johnson. So I'll roll with the Tide. I do think Jordan Marshall is a player to watch for Michigan, going to be a very talented running back going into 2025, but I'll roll with the Tide right about now, and I'll roll with Jalen Milroe to get his final win in that jersey. Then you got Louisville, Washington. Really, really fun matchup here. Two teams that relatively under the radar this year have missed a couple of opportunities throughout the year to make this an incredible year. Washington falls in some really close games throughout this one. Louisville really wasn't all that far off from competing for an ACC title. Just had a couple of things go the wrong way in a couple of those games, particularly the SMU game. But overall, this will be a really interesting matchup. Damon Williams will give you a look into what 2025 will look like for Washington. Very talented kid with his legs. Definitely can make plenty of throws. Probably needs to take a little bit of a step forward in that respect, but going to be a very talented kid next year and cannot wait to see what he can do on this stage. And then for Louisville, it will not be Tyler Shuck at quarterback. He is going to move on to the NFL draft. Doesn't mean it's going to be Harrison Bailey. Very talented kid coming out of high school, bounced around a little bit to Tennessee and now at NC State, but very talented kid, very excited to see what he can do. But more importantly, they have Isaac Brown. And when you have Isaac Brown, you can do a lot of special things in the run game. So that'll probably be the guy you see the most, number 25 there. And then it's going to be a good one. Cannot wait for this one to get. I think it's going to be weird, wild, a little bit of inexperience at quarterback makes for some crazy football. Let's just be totally honest. But I think Louisville has the firepower at the running back position to take this one. I think the Cardinals might just roll in this game. Really like the Cardinals in this one, and I really like Isaac Brown to have a huge one. South Carolina, Illinois, one of the last ranked matchup that we will get in bowl season, going to be a really, really interesting one because the reality is when you have number 16 in Garden and Black there, it's going to be a fun game to watch. Lenora Sellers is absolutely appointment television at this point. If he wasn't this year for you, he better be in 2025 because he is as fun as it gets. And the other guy on the other side, Luke Altmaier, had an incredible year this year. He's going to be back for 2025, and Illinois fans love to hear that. Fantastic quarterback that absolutely can take that next step, and maybe they're the team that Indiana was this year. But it'll be awesome to watch these two teams go at it. I think Lenora Sellers will have a load to deal with. There's no doubt about that. He will have a lot on his shoulders in this game, and then they will be without Kyle Kennard, so Dylan Edwards will have a lot on his shoulders in that pass rush game, but I think it'll be fun. I think it'll be hotly contested. I think we will get some points in this game. Great cultures on both teams because not a ton of opt-outs here, but overall, I think they'll be in full tilt. I just got to go with Dylan Stewart and Lenora Sellers. I think those are the two most special athletes on the field. I'll roll with them to get this win. Baylor LSU, two teams that are looking at 2025 and saying, why not us? Maybe we can make a little bit of a run at that CFP, at that conference championship, because you look at the way that Baylor finished this season with Sawyer Robertson, it's been really incredible to watch. He's been a huge, huge piece for them, and he will be back for 2025. So you have a little bit of stability there, as does LSU. Garrett Nussmeier will be back for 2025. Now, not a lot of other people will be back around him. Lost both offensive tackles in this game. No Kyron Lacey in this game. More players on the defensive side of the ball that have entered the portal. A lot of different things that are going to have to fall into place for LSU in this game, and a lot of scrambling going on right now to figure out how they're going to fall into place. But overall, I think LSU can make a number of plays in this game. I think they're going to be able to push the ball downfield and take advantage of some of the athletic ability that they do have, but I really like Sawyer Robertson. I'm not sure that you won't have a couple of mistakes, especially with the O-line issues. I think Garrett Nussmeier will give them a couple of possessions, and I think Baylor will take full advantage. I'll take Baylor to win this one and maybe be a really dangerous team in 2025. And then you do have the one on Thursday after all the CFP quarterfinal games. Duke against Ole Miss, two teams that Duke had an incredible year. A lot of stuff has fallen apart since then. Malik Murphy has walked out the door. I don't want to say was pushed, was encouraged to walk out the door. I'll put it that way for the time being. But at the end of the day, Duke is going to be starting a different quarterback this time around. I assume it will be Grayson Loftus in this game, had played in the prior years, so that'll be an interesting thing to watch. For Ole Miss, pretty much everyone's playing, which is really remarkable. Huge shout out to Lane Kiffin because let's be honest, when we saw this team constructed, I think a lot of us thought that if they were playing in one of these bowl games, a lot of these guys weren't going to go. So incredible to see all of those guys going, at least most of those guys. They could be a couple of opt-outs here and there with Trey Harris, Walter Nolan. We'll see what happens there. But overall, it's going to be really, really awesome to watch those guys get on the field one more time as Ole Miss Rebels, and I think Jackson Dart's going to put on a show. I think it's going to be an absolute dominating performance. I think they're still pretty mad about that selection committee stuff, and I think they'll take care of business here. So it'll be incredible to watch what this game has, and definitely will be one I cannot wait for. And before we get out of this one, I want to make sure I answer some of these questions that Anthony has over here. Yeah, I do think some of the Hurricane fans, you want to see him out there. You want to see number one, the guy that led you this far, that's guy that's been the leader of this team for the entire year. You want to see him out there, and I think all of us did. But at the end of the day, I can't even fathom what it's like to make a decision like that. So I'm not here to throw stones at the kid. I'm not here to attack him and say he made absolutely the wrong decision. It's his decision to make. I fully support whatever he does. And then when you look at the future... Or excuse me, do you think we see the future at quarterback later in the game for Iowa? That is an interesting question. I think there's a lot of different. It's a tightrope walk. Whenever you have, you want to finish the season strong, you want to give love to the seniors, to the veterans on your team, but you also got to see what you have in 2025. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a couple of quarterback changes in this thing, kind of played around with some different things, especially with these offenses kind of changing a lot next year. Wouldn't be surprised by that by any means. And Sawyer Robertson, he's so much fun. He is a mobile quarterback. He's absolutely a guy that can scoot pretty good. He is going to be a huge player in 2025. I really think Baylor is one of those teams that could kind of be in the situation that maybe a BYU was this year, or maybe SMU was this year, just in the Big 12. They're a very talented team, very well coached, and I think Sawyer Robertson has a lot of juice. I think he's a fantastic quarterback and could very well be one of the best quarterbacks in that conference next year. And then for Ole Miss, how long do you think Jackson Dart plays? I would say a half. I think that's probably fair to say. I think a half, kind of follow the Cam Ward way of things. Play a half, let Austin Simmons get in there, because I do think that's the quarterback for them next year. Definitely want to see him play out a full half. So that's kind of my inkling there. We'll see what happens. He's obviously a guy that would love to play every single snap in this game, but I think him and Lane Kiffin have a plan in place. I expect to see Austin Simmons pretty consistently throughout this game. So it'll be fun to watch all of that unfold. A lot of different dynamics in these bowl games now, but let's take our third break here, and when we come back, we got to talk about the transfer portal. There is a ton of stuff happening, a couple of commitments as this thing closed, a couple of guys that jumped in at the last moment, and a couple of people that can still jump in after this. We'll break it all down right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the bowl games coming up this weekend, some of the ones that have already happened, including Kyle McCord getting the ACC season passing record. Remarkable season from him after quite a few people wrote him off after last year. But let's get to a little bit of transfer portal update. It is officially closed. The transfer portal, the window at least, is officially closed on the 28th. So on Saturday night, officially kind of came to a close. That being said, it is still open for certain teams, and we'll get to that at the end, I promise you, but let's jump into all of the commitments that have happened thus far, because there have been some big-time ones, and none bigger than this guy. Casey Concepcion has committed to A&M. I cannot love enough what A&M has done at that wide receiver position. They have added Mario Craver, they have added Micah Hudson, and now Casey Concepcion to that team. It's a clear wide receiver 1, 2, and 3 as far as I'm concerned. You have Casey Concepcion at 1, you have Mario Craver at 2, you have Micah Hudson at 3. A lot of talent. That's one of the most talented wide receiver groups probably in the entire country as you head into 2025, and you still have some questions of if they can unlock that talent with Marcel Reed at quarterback, with that offensive scheme that they do run, but overall, it's going to be one of the best units on paper in the country. There's no doubt about that, and then you just got to put it to work. This is an absolute star that had a little bit of a tough season as NC State did, but the ceiling of this kid is just absolutely remarkably high. JoJo Earle is a guy I wanted to talk to you here for a second. This is a pickup I just really, really like. He is making his way over to Las Vegas to join Dan Mullen in UNLV. I think this guy has just been in the wrong positions. I'll be totally honest. He was at Alabama early, made his way over to TCU a couple of years ago, and just never quite fit. It just never quite meshed the way that he wanted it to. I think in Dan Mullen's offense, he could do some special things. I think he could explode in 2025. Maybe he's back in the portal after 2025 to get to a bigger school again, but overall, I think this is a great fit for him, a great place for him to set up shop, and I think him and Dan Mullen could do some special things in 2025. Now we got some quarterbacks that came off the board, some more under-the-radar quarterbacks, but still guys you're going to want to know. Walker White, he is committed to Baylor, so we were just talking about Sawyer Robertson. This will be the successor to Sawyer Robertson, a very, very talented kid from, I believe was a 4-star coming out of high school. Very talented kid, definitely a guy that Baylor, you're in a really, really good spot going forward. You know, you have Sawyer Robertson, you try to make as well of a run as you possibly can next year at the CFP, but then you got the quarterback right after him. So as long as you can get everything in order, start to get NIL a little bit more kicked up and start to get all of that stuff into gear, some special things could possibly happen down there in Waco for a little bit. Then Braden Locke, he was a starter for Wisconsin for a number of their games, but as they brought in Billy Edwards, he found his way out. He's going to find his way down to Tucson, Arizona. He's going to join Arizona and be probably the backup for Noah Fafita. I think this is a really solid pickup for Arizona. I don't necessarily expect him to start week 1 by any means, but I do think it helps this team not bottom out. It helps them not be, if Noah Fafita is going to make a play, great. If he doesn't make the play, we're going to lose this game. So you have an ability to kind of have that guy back there, keep that quarterback room in a little bit better of a shape than it was this year. Definitely a really solid pickup, and you could have to see him at some point this year, especially if Noah Fafita struggles like he did this year. Joey Aguilar, this one was a little bit more interesting to me. I did not expect this one, but he is finding his way over to play for the UCLA Bruins in 2025. He's going over to join Tino Sunseri and that staff that is becoming very, very talented before our eyes. Todd Centennial from JMU, his former quarterback, has joined the staff as, I believe, the quarterback coach or an analyst, something like, I can't exactly remember, but very talented kid nonetheless. Kind of fits the same mold of that kid, so could be a similar tale, obviously at a different level of the sport, but at the end of the day, Joey Aguilar, very talented kid, had a little bit of a step back this year, so it'll be interesting to see what happens at that UCLA quarterback position, but this is definitely one of the options for 2025. Jonte Cook is a guy we got to talk about. He had a great move from Texas to Washington. He's going to be a Husky in 2025 and very talented kid. He absolutely could be their top guy in 2025. Really speedy, really twitchy. It sounded like Florida was really in for this one, but this just makes more sense to me. It's a much less crowded room. It's one that he can step in and immediately be a starter, immediately be a big-time player for them. Very talented kid. I think he's one of those guys that we could be talking about a lot next season. Josh Thompson, we talked about him, one of the biggest offensive linemen on the market right now. LSU was able to pull him in. Tennessee really wanted this kid. They felt like they might have had him locked down about a week ago. Then LSU came into the mix, and they kind of took over this one. Huge pickup for LSU. They're losing 4 starters this upcoming year. They're going to need to replace him in a big way. They would love for this kid to play in the bowl game, but can't quite do that. He's going to be an awesome pickup for 2025, and absolutely will slide into likely that Will Campbell position at left tackle, maybe right tackle, depending on their options at left. Emmanuel Carnley is a guy you're going to want to watch. Miami's biggest problem this year was the back end. There's no doubt about that. They're getting really good reinforcements here. I can't promise that this will be a starter for them right away because he is still relatively young, is a freshman, but very highly touted freshman. Definitely a guy that can make a lot of different plays on the back end for you guys, and I think he's one of those guys that maybe it's not right away. Maybe it's not week 1. He's out there starting, making all the plays in the world, but maybe by week 11, he's a huge player in this defense and is making a ton of different plays on the back end. And just wanted to give some love to the FCS level here. Sacramento State is doing work in the portal. It's been absolutely incredible to watch what Brennan Marion has done in this short time being the head coach there. It just goes to show you that Brennan Marion should be a head coach at an FBS school. The fact that a number of FBS schools went past his name in this process is absolutely insane. I don't expect him to be at Sacramento State very long, especially with the talent that he's getting. That's going to be a really fun team to watch in 2025, and going forward, might be making the jump to the FBS. So it'll be really interesting to see what Sac State does going forward, and it's going to be Brennan Marion leading the way. I have a lot of high hopes for this team. And then we got some intel and late additions to the portal as it was closing. Mark Gronowski is probably the biggest one of the bunch. 10,000 yards throughout his career at San Diego State. One of the best players in the FCS throughout his time. And his head coach is heading over to Pullman, getting hired over there. Remarkable hire from Washington State, by the way. But sounds like Mark Gronowski probably is not going to join him there. Now, he very well could. That definitely is going to be one of his options out there, but I think there's going to be a lot of teams calling. I think there were a lot of teams calling last year for this kid, if I had to be honest, so I think there's going to be a number of teams getting after this kid. Maybe this is Bill Belichick's guy. He's been going after quarterbacks at different times. This would be a guy that I think he would really, really like. It'll be interesting to see what happens there. Definitely a lot of teams calling him right now, and I assume we'll get a decision relatively quickly after the dead period ends. Squirrel White is a new guy in the portal. Tennessee had a number of guys jump in after Christian Moore, another one on the defensive side of the ball, and we'll talk about one that hasn't jumped in yet, but a situation to watch right here in a second. But overall, they've lost a number of guys. This is a big-time player. There's no doubt about that. This is a guy that hasn't been all that healthy throughout this year, so it's a little bit of a toss-up how big of an effect it will have on Tennessee. I do think if you put him in the right system, if you get him healthy, he could have a huge impact on his new team. He is a very, very talented player. You need to keep him healthy. You need to put him in positions to succeed, but he definitely can do that. If he gets into an offense like Alabama or like Texas, I know that he wants to get a little bit closer to home. He was born in Alabama, so those two schools, Auburn and Alabama, could be two to watch, but plenty of teams will be calling him right now, and we'll see what happens with this recruitment. And then Mike Matthews is another one to watch here for Tennessee, a very, very talented 5-star wide receiver that was a freshman, played time here and there, probably should have played a little bit more as far as I'm concerned, but at the end of the day, not officially in the portal. It sounds like him and Tennessee are still trying to work out some NIL agreements, and that will be something that we will talk about, obviously, when we break this down again, but I like to think Tennessee will be able to hold on to him, but definitely if they don't, he will be one of the biggest, probably the biggest wide receiver name on the market right when he jumps in. The biggest running back name on the market is Mekhi Hughes right about now. Very, very talented running back, over 1,300 yards this year. Sounds like Duke, Colorado, and Ole Miss are the ones you're going to want to watch for. His old quarterback, Darius Mensah, found his way to Duke famously, and then Ole Miss always needs a running back. They badly need a running back in this cycle, and then Colorado, if they can pick this one up, it's going to be a huge, huge thing, especially if you want to try out Julian Lewis in that first game of the season. He's going to need a run game to fall back on. This would be a great piece to add to that. Another running back from the G5 level to watch out for is Rashul Faison, very talented running back from Utah State. Tons of teams are calling this guy, so after the dead period, we'll have a better idea of what's going to go on here, but it sounds like Georgia and Florida State could be two to watch here. Georgia, obviously, is going to lose Trevor Etienne after this year, has had some injury troubles there, so would not be the worst idea in the world to pick him up. Florida State just needs their running back. They badly need a guy that can carry the load for them, much like Trey Benson did a couple of years ago. This might just be the guy for them. So we'll know more after the dead period ends early in the next year, but definitely a player to watch right after that. Jeremiah Johnson, very good safety from Georgia State here. Penn State, USC, Indiana, Georgia Tech, Missouri, North Carolina, and many more are very much in for this kid. Very talented kid, 164 career tackles. He would be an immediate starter at any of the places I just named. So definitely a guy that all of these guys want. You'd have to lean Penn State, I feel like, in that group of schools, but North Carolina will have plenty to say. I think Georgia Tech will have plenty to say to just keep him in Atlanta. It'll be interesting to watch what happens there. And then Ethan O'Connor. This is a Washington State transfer that is going to be a huge name to watch. He was at Georgia here shortly, just a little bit ago. Miami just a little bit before that. He's an immediate impact guy. He is almost definitely a starter at just about any place that he goes. A lot of teams will be reaching out to this kid, but sounds like Miami and Georgia might be the two ones you're going to want to watch the most closely. And then we got the available transfer. Zachariah Branch is still out there. I still expect it to be Georgia. Arizona State is really, really hanging around in this one. So one of those two I feel like is going to win out there. Takario Davis, I think he's going to go to the NFL. He hasn't made that decision. He has until the 6th to make that decision. But overall, I think he will be an NFL player. You really do see it's kind of starting to thin out. You know, you're not having those elite players in here right now. Now, that probably could change here pretty soon because there are still some teams on the clock. There are still some teams that are very much in the portal window. The CFP teams are the main among them. So Texas, Georgia, Oregon, Ohio State, and all the rest of the teams in there. The biggest thing here is I think Georgia will lose a quarterback in this process. One of those guys in that, hodgepodge of quarterbacks that they have right now will probably find their way out the door. I think Texas will probably lose a wide receiver. There will be movement. There's no doubt about that. There will be people bouncing around this, that, and the other. Definitely a lot of very talented guys out there. But at the end of the day, these teams still have to look over their shoulder. They still have to worry about some guys, and there will be some guys from these teams that find their way into the portal that maybe you don't expect all that much. Teams with a bowl game left. So Alabama, LSU, Michigan, a number of other teams like that. These are ones that usually they've decided by now. You go into a bowl game, a lot of guys have already left. They found new places to play, things like that. There will be a couple. There will be a couple of guys that trickle out after this game. Can't promise that it'll be a big-time player, but maybe. The Alabama situation has been very interesting, and there are a couple of guys that definitely could jump ship. It'll be interesting to watch that unfold, definitely, and definitely some talented players that are still very much on the market. And then the ones that played this weekend or played anywhere from 5 days ago. That's kind of the opening that players have to get into the portal. So Miami, Colorado, a couple of these others, you'll see a couple from those couple of teams. But again, like I just said, usually they're in before the bowl game. It'll be interesting to see how many of those guys leave and if there's any big-time names. You have to assume there will be a couple in there that really do shock you. But overall, I do think it'll be relatively benign. After the bowl games, at least, after the CFP games, could be a little bit different, could see some bigger names go in there. But it's a crazy time in the transfer portal. It officially closed, so we have a little bit of time to catch our breath, but there's going to be plenty of more time to get after stuff, and it really doesn't close until 5 days after the national title. So that's when we'll really know where we're at in this transfer portal world, but for the time being, things have started to taper down just a little bit. Let's talk about Ethan O'Connor here for a second. Getting both Brantley and Emmanuel Corley, which one of these guys would move to safety? Very, very tough decision. I would lean Michael Brantley if I'm being totally honest, but overall, I really don't know. I think Ethan O'Connor is one of those guys that you almost have to put at corner. Very, very talented ball skills, so I'd lean that he would be the corner, and then between those other two guys, I think you could kind of flip a coin. I would lean Michael Brantley just because of his size, but overall, I think it's kind of a toss-up. It'll be interesting to see how they handle that. Overall, they just need bodies in that back end, and they just need to fix that very, very quickly. And I'm sure they will, but these are two, or could be three, great additions to possibly fix that. So will be interesting to watch all of that unfold. The transfer portal, although it is technically closed, it is far from over. So we'll update you on everything that you need to know as we go on. But let's get to a couple of CFP quarterfinal questions. Right after this break, we'll jump into everything. What's the most interesting games? Or will we get more interesting games this time around? Can Ohio State sustain that A+ level of play? And so much more right after this break. So stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the transfer portal is officially closed, sort of. There will still be a lot of movement out there and still be some teams that have some portal windows after their bowl games, after their CFP games. There will be plenty to talk about. We'll leave it at that for the time being. We will update you as you need to know, but let's get to some questions for the CFP quarterfinals that we were getting this weekend. There's some really interesting things to kind of get into here, but let's start with the one that everyone wants to know. Will we get more interesting games this time around? Because the reality is, the closest line was -7 with Ohio State, Tennessee. None of them covered their line. So it was a lot of blowouts. Let's just be totally honest. Texas was actually the closest to covering their line. They won by 14. The line was 13.5. So it was ugly. Let's just be totally honest. It was not what we wanted out of the first round games. It was probably what we should have expected, to be totally fair. But at the end of the day, last week it was -7 Ohio State, Tennessee. That was the closest line that we had in this entire thing. This week we do have -2.5 Ohio State, -1.5 Georgia. I think it's fair to say we're going to get at least one good game between those two. I like to think we'll get both good games, but I'll hedge myself. I'll say we'll get at least one game that is going to be a really fun one between that. Then you do have Texas favored by 12.5, Penn State favored by 11.5. So that adds a little bit different of a conversation here, no doubt about that. But when you talk about those two games, who are the two best players in those games? It's Ashton Jeanty for Boise State, and it's Cam Scadaboo for Arizona State. So you have an opening where maybe the best team is on one side, the best player is on the other side, and he gets the ball very, very often. So it'll be interesting to see if they can possibly, make a little bit of a run here and cause some problems. I think ASU is very dangerous and could very well push Texas. Boise State, I said earlier, think that one's going to get a little bit ugly, but at the end of the day, I do think we're going to have a lot of awesome games. I think we'll have two that are going to be absolutely incredible. I think we very well could have three. I think that Texas-Arizona State game, I would be a little bit surprised if we got all four, but at the end of the day, would love to see all four. So I think we have some gems in here. I think it will be much better than the last time that we played, and I think especially when we get this matchup again, it's going to be plenty of fun to watch. I can promise you that. And then let's talk about Ohio State here for a second. Can they sustain that level of play? Can they keep up that level of play as you go throughout this tournament? Because the Tennessee game was incredible. It was as good of football as I've seen really just about anyone in the country play this entire year. They were absolutely incredible. They were clicking on all cylinders. It was incredible to watch. There's no doubt about that. Can they keep that up for multiple games in a row is a huge question mark, because they've done this at different points this year. They've played really good football. They come back the next week, and it just looks a little bit off. It happened against Nebraska. It happened against Michigan. So you're in a position where you got a lot of stuff to figure out, and you got to make sure that you have everything, your ducks in a row. And in a lot of ways, it comes down to this offense. Letting Will Howard make those throws that he's becoming more and more confident making, and then just throw it to number 4. I know it's not, great football analysis. I know I'm not breaking down X's and O's very well here, but the reality is the kid's an alien. Throw the ball up to him. Let him make a couple of plays. He will come down with it more times than he won't, and you will come down with a win more times than you won't if you trust that kid. So it comes down to Ryan Day and Chip Kelly, making sure you get your guys out on the outside to make some plays, and then you just feed the ball to number 4 and let him do what he does. And then you got a number of other things to worry about. Will Howard played an incredible game, played the best game that really I've maybe ever seen him play, probably since that Big 12 championship game that I've seen him play last week against Tennessee. The reality is he's got to keep it up. He has not necessarily been the most consistent commodity throughout this year, and he's going to have to really play that elite level football throughout this year throughout the next couple of games if they're going to want to continue to move on. That O-line is going to have to continue to play well, where that's still a big time question mark as you head into this one, and then that defense has to be that defense. But Ohio State has everything they need to possibly keep up. They have everything they need to keep that pace up and to be playing elite football throughout this tournament run. The question is, can they throughout the next 3 games, can they keep that insane level and really put teams away? It'll be a big time question. I tend to believe they have the ability to do it. The execution is always something that is kind of up in the air until that ball is kicked off. Will star running backs lead a little bit of an upset is another question that I have. We have 2 guys that are just outright incredible. They're going to be incredible to watch this week. They've been incredible to watch the entire year, and they're currently in very lopsided matchups. At least Vegas seems to think so. So Ashton Jeanty, one of the best players in the entire country, he can take over games, plain and simple. He can be the reason that Boise State wins this game. He's just going to have to kind of put him on his back, like he has pretty much the entire year, but he has the ability. Will the openings be there the way that he needs them to in this defense? For Cam Skattebo, I think the big time question here is just, you're going to have to run through one of the best run defenses in the country. You are going to get hit harder than you have gotten hit the entire year. Probably the same applies to Texas, if I'm being totally honest with this kid, but at the end of the day, it's going to be as good on good, about as good on good as you will see this entire tournament. Is going to be Cam Skattebo against that front 7, and it's going to be really fun to watch. Can he get all the openings that he needs, and when he does, can he take full advantage of them, is going to be a big time question. But these will be the 2 best players on the field, no doubt about that, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. I think these 2 players are going to have a ton of success on Saturday, or this weekend. Always get lost with that, but at the end of the day, they have the ability to pull the upset. They're going to need to do quite a bit of work to get there. Which coach has the toughest task this upcoming weekend? And I'll start with Marcus Arroyo and Kenny Dillingham. We just talked about that defense. Nightmare. I think it's an absolute nightmare to deal with for that Texas defense if you're going to get any openings, really, for Cam Skattebo in this game. That comes down to Marcus Arroyo and Kenny Dillingham having a great game plan. You can't just play this game straight up. You can't play this game the exact same way you have played every other game this year, because the reality is you're playing right into what Texas wants to do. So you're going to have to be a little bit creative. You're going to have to be a little bit crazy and probably pull a little bit of rabbit out of your hat at some point throughout this game. They have the ability to do it, but it's going to be a tall order in this one. Then you got Eric Chenander and you have Spencer Danielson. This Penn State offense is a problem. Let's be totally honest. The offense for Boise State is going to be Ashton Jeanty, but the defense just has to be perfect in this game, and mainly the blitz packages have to be perfect in this game. You can't send a nickel back and then lose the tight end over the middle of the field. You can't send a linebacker, not get home, and then they have a 50-yard pass down the middle of the field. You have to be very careful. You have to be very calculated, but you got to get after the quarterback. So sometimes you're just going to have to go for broke. Sometimes you're going to have to be a little bit dangerous in this. But the reality is, if you don't get to Drew Aller, he's going to go for 400 yards, and you are going to leave with a 28-point loss. And then Jim Knowles and Ryan Day. This Oregon offense is an absolute nightmare. And it's not just because they have tons of talent. It's not just because they have a quarterback that can make all the plays. they can hit you in literally every single part of the field. They can run inside zone. They can run outside zone. They can run stretch plays. They can run pitch plays. They can do quarterback runs. They can hit short, intermediate, deep balls. They have all the motions in the world to deal with, and just for fun, they have some of the biggest freaks on the outside that you could possibly see in Ches Johnson and Evan Stewart. So I don't know. I don't know how you defend this team. I don't know how you keep this team off the board. Ohio State has to be perfect. They weren't quite perfect the first time around, and Oregon made them pay for it. They're going to have to be a lot better this time around. Matchup of the week. Chip Kelly against Tosh Lupoy, I just cannot wait for. It's going to be so much fun to watch. Chip Kelly put together one of the best game plans I've seen in quite some time against Tennessee. When he got all those guys out on the edge, really played around with what Tennessee was doing, gave his offensive line tons of chances to get a little bit easier of a block in some of those respects. So he did an incredible job. Tosh Lupoy kind of beat him the first time around. There were a couple of different moments where Tosh Lupoy did a number of really incredible things. Obviously, the Ohio State offense played plenty well in that game, but Tosh Lupoy probably won this battle the first time around. Chip Kelly's going to want to win it the second time around. And then staying in that game, Ches Johnson versus Denzel Burke. That's what everyone's going to be watching. Number 15 against number 10 because number 10 got KO'd. He got absolutely knocked down in the last one, and he was just torn to pieces. Let's just be totally honest. Denzel Burke had a day to forget, and he very much wants to get back there on the field. He wants to line up in front of number 15. He wants to win that battle this time around. It's going to be an awesome one to watch, no doubt about that. And then we talked about this one. It's about as good as it gets. It's two just absolute physical units. It's two of the meanest units in the entire country. They're going to be collisions in this game. It is going to be a war of attrition. It's going to be whoever quits first type of thing in this game. So it's going to be incredible to watch all of that unfold, and definitely will be a huge thing to watch in this game. Could be one of those battles that just outright decide it. And then Russ versus Rust. What will win out is a big-time question because this is the first time we're going to be able to see it. You know, a lot of these teams haven't played since championship weekend. 4 of them played 10 days ago. So which one will win out? Which one is a little bit better? I tend to lean towards, you want to have played the game, then have all that time to sit out. It's up in the air. It's kind of a case-by-case basis. I do think that Ashton Jeanty and Cam Scadaboo definitely really benefited from that time off to kind of get themselves fully healthy. I think Texas could have benefited really well from that time off to get Quinn Ewers' health where they wanted it to be. Obviously, he's a little bit more healthy now regardless, but definitely some different things to be on the lookout for. And then at the end of the day, it probably won't be a deciding factor in this game. I understand that's going to be a big topic of conversation, and it'll be interesting to see, how much is Ashton Jeanty, is he more springy in this game? Does he have that breakaway speed that he's kind of lost throughout this year? Are there a couple of those things that we see that really stand out, or is it pretty much even footing? It'll be hard to tell until about halfway through these games, but overall, definitely will play something of a part. I don't know how big of a part it will play, but a couple of questions here from Anthony before we wrap up here. I love the energy. I love the energy. You're a very anti-James Franklin guy, and I understand that's impulse. I'm not arguing that by any means, but it'll be really interesting to see what happens here. I think Boise State's one of those teams that they do a lot of really good things. They do a lot of things right. They don't give you a lot of things. They run the ball very effectively. They're not going to put the ball in bad positions, and they're going to get after you on the defensive side of the ball. So there's an opening there. There's no doubt about that. They're going to have to start that game fast. If they fall down by 7-14 early on, it's going to be a really ugly game, and it's going to get ugly early. I can almost promise you that. And then you're talking about the run fits with the linebackers. Absolutely. It has been an issue at different times for Texas. They've been able to make up for it in a lot of ways with those safeties that come downhill so quickly, like Michael Taff, like Andrew Makuba, but definitely something to think about. Cam Scadaboo is going to be able to take advantage. If Anthony Hill jumps one gap over, Cam Scadaboo can put his foot in the ground and get upfield in the other gap. So it's going to be a lot of different things, and it's going to be one of those things where it's not just a pound, 3 yards and a pound of dust. It's going to be a lot of different things, and you're going to have to see how those linebackers play. It's going to be a huge task for Anthony Hill, for David Benda, for Leon Leofau, a lot of really talented guys in that linebacker group, but it has been something of an issue thus far this year. Hasn't quite come back to bite them, but this is the best running back they've played all year, that is for sure. But that'll do it. I'm going a little bit long here. Don't want to run into my guy Kenneth at all, but thank you so much for tuning in to the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have great people covering every single sport you could want. So anything in the world of sports you need, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow for all the other picks for the CFP quarterfinals.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.